Maria, what is that child doing here? This is a $10 billion company, not a daycare center. Get him out. The voice of Victoria Vance, the 45-year-old CEO of Vance Data, was a high-pitched shriek of pure, uncut panic. It cracked like a whip across the glass-walled war room on the 80th floor. She glared at my mother, Maria Washington, her office maid, and at me, her 12-year-old son, standing quietly by the door in a faded hoodie, holding a broom. Before this goes any further, I need to know what part of the world you're watching from. Comment your city and the time right now. The room was a tomb of dead technology. Vance Data, her $10 billion empire, was on day 3 of a catastrophic systems crash. A kernel panic, the digital equivalent of a flatline. Every server, every terminal, every screen in her global network was black. Her stock had evaporated, crashing 80% in 72 hours. The company was bleeding an estimated $500 million a day. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee, cold pizza, and the palpable, expensive terror of the best minds money can buy. Dr. Croft, the $10,000 an hour expert from MIT, was sweating through his $3,000 suit. Sarah, the Harvard data scientist, was just staring blankly at a screen of cascading, unintelligible error logs. They were all failing. And we, my mother and I, were the distractions. The lead expert, Dr. Croft, a man whose entire personality was his MIT degree, scoffed. He didn't even bother to look up from his useless laptop. Victoria, please remove the distractions. We are trying to stop a global extinction-level event here. We don't have time for janitorial staff. Janitorial staff. That's what we were. My mother, Maria Washington, the most brilliant woman I've ever known, who had sacrificed her own college dreams to raise me and my sister. The woman who worked 18-hour days, 6 days a week, cleaning the filth of people like Victoria Vance just to pay for my sister's experimental cancer treatments. That was the help. And I, her 12-year-old son, was the child. We were not human. We were distractions. We were vermin. We were human furniture, an annoyance to be swatted away while the real, credentialed, important people failed. The injustice wasn't just that they were rude. It was that they were blind. Their arrogance, their credentialism, was a terminal disease. I had been standing in the back of this glass box for 3 days, silently sweeping, while my mother emptied the trash cans overflowing with their expensive, artisanal coffee cups and sushi containers. I had watched Dr. Croft, the guru, run the same failed diagnostic 14 times. He was a credential, not a coder. He knew how to manage, how to bill, how to talk. He did not know how to think. On day 1, he had been all confidence. "It's a simple DDoS attack," he'd announced, his voice booming. "We'll have this patched in an hour." 12 hours later, his patches had only accelerated the data corruption. On day 2, he'd pivoted. "This is a sophisticated state-sponsored attack," he declared, his voice now a little tighter. "The code is, it's like nothing I've ever seen. It appears to be quantum encrypted." Quantum encrypted. I almost laughed, a sound I had to stifle as a cough. It wasn't quantum. It wasn't even clever. Dr. Croft, with his MIT credentials, and Victoria Vance, with her Harvard MBA, saw a distraction. They saw the Maid son. They had no idea who they were talking to. They had no idea they were looking at the one person on Earth who could save them. They couldn't know that I, Leah Washington, the 12-year-old kid in the faded hoodie, was Zero Cool. They couldn't know that Zero Cool was the legendary, anonymous open-source coding prodigy who, at age 11 from his bedroom on a used, refurbished laptop, had written the Ether kernel. The exact kernel their entire, $10 billion, proprietary cloud network was built on. I wasn't just a coder, I was the author, I was the architect, I was the god of their entire collapsing digital universe. I wrote it for fun, a challenge to see if I could build a more stable, more efficient cloud architecture than the corporate giants. I released it, Ether, into the world under the anonymous handle ZeroCool, an open-source gift under the GNU General Public License. I never wanted money. I just wanted to build. Vance Data, in its early, desperate startup days, had taken my open-source code. They had stolen it. They had bolted their own, sloppy, proprietary, and frankly stupid code on top of it, buried my authorship, hidden the kernel's origins, and claimed it as their revolutionary new platform. And now that sloppy code was at war with my perfect code. The state-sponsored attack that Dr. Croft, the $10,000 an hour expert, was hunting for. It was a floating-point error in their primary data type. They were trying to force a 32-bit signed integer into a memory slot I had designated as a 64-bit unsigned string variable. They were trying to fit an ocean into a teacup. The system, my system, was doing exactly what I had designed it to do. It was kernel panicking. It was shutting down to prevent the catastrophic data corruption their incompetence was trying to force upon it. It wasn't an attack. It was self-defense. And I stood there, watching them try to hack their way past a problem that required a key. I was the only one who had the key, because I had built the lock. My mother had been cleaning Victoria Vance's penthouse office for 2 years. I was only here today because my sister was in the hospital for another round of chemo, and my mother couldn't afford a babysitter. So I tagged along, just a quiet kid with a broom, standing in the back of a war room, watching a group of $10,000 an hour experts completely misunderstand the system I had created. So when Victoria Vance, her face a mask of panic and raw, unfiltered entitlement, shrieked at my mother, "Maria, what is that child doing here? Get him out." It wasn't just an insult. It was the absolute cosmic pinnacle of irony. The $500 million an hour problem was being caused by the experts she paid. And the only solution, the only one, was standing 10 feet away from her, holding a broom, being told he was a distraction. "Maria, I mean it," Victoria snapped, her voice breaking, the panic making her even crueler. "He's a liability, he's a contamination risk. Get him out." My mother, her face burning with a humiliation I had seen far too often, a humiliation I had vowed to one day end, grabbed my hand. Her own was rough, chapped from the cleaning chemicals. "I'm sorry, Miss Vance, I'm so sorry, Leo. Come, we go." She was pulling me toward the door. The experts were already turning back to their screens, relieved that the janitorial staff problem was solved. The company was still dying. The stock was still a flatline. The $500 million an hour bleed was accelerating. And they were still, all of them, completely and totally wrong. Victoria Vance, Dr. Croft, her entire hand-picked team of $10,000 an hour geniuses, had just insulted, dismissed, and ejected the single most valuable human being on the planet. They were trying to solve a puzzle, and they had just, with all the arrogance their expensive educations could muster, told the man who built the puzzle to go clean the toilets. They were about to learn the difference between credentials and genius the hard way. They were about to learn that the Maid's son they had just banished was the only one who held the key. They just made the worst, the most expensive, and the most humiliating mistake of their entire, credentialed and soon-to-be-over careers. My mother, Maria, pulled me from the war room, her hand tight on my arm, her knuckles white. Her shame was a physical force, a hot, suffocating wave that filled the hallway. "I'm sorry, Miss Vance. So sorry," she kept whispering, pulling me toward the service elevator, away from the glass-walled conference room where the intellectuals were deciding the fate of the world. Victoria Vance hadn't even acknowledged her apology. She and her team of high-priced, credentialed failures were already back to staring at the dead screens, their $10,000 an hour brains turning to ash. I looked back just once. I saw Dr. Croft, the MIT expert, rubbing his temples, a picture of profound, expensive incompetence. He had just moments ago insulted my work. He had called the ether kernel, my kernel, amateurish and garbage. And now he was, in his infinite, educated wisdom, about to recommend a procedure that was the equivalent of tearing down a skyscraper, because a light bulb was burnt out. Back in the war room, the atmosphere was a tomb. The brief, ugly distraction of the janitorial staff was over. Victoria Vance, her $10 billion empire hemorrhaging $500 million a day, turned back to her team. Her face was a mask of pale, brittle terror. She was a CEO, a visionary, a Harvard MBA, and she was utterly, totally useless. She was surrounded by the best minds, the brightest talents, the most expensive credentials on Earth. And they were all, in that moment, just as useless as she was. This was the competitor system, a closed loop of high-priced, credentialed incompetence, all reinforcing each other's failure, all trapped in a feedback loop of their own expensive, educated hubris. They could not find a simple error because they were only looking for a complex enemy. Their arrogance demanded that the problem be as sophisticated as they were. "Dr. Croft," Victoria said, her voice a low, trembling quiver. "The board, they're on an emergency video call. They want an answer, an official diagnosis." She was handing him the platform. This was the villain's trap. She was offering him a chance to save his own reputation, to frame the narrative, to create the official story that would absolve them all of their failure. Dr. Croft, a man who had not written a line of original code in 20 years but whose $10,000 an hour fee was legendary, seized it. He knew he was baffled. He knew he was beaten. But he would rather see the company burn than admit he, an MIT legend, had been defeated. He stood up. He adjusted his silk tie. He put on his expert face. "Victoria," he said, his voice a deep, sonorous, and utterly fraudulent baritone. "Members of the board," he nodded to the massive, dark video screen where the faces of the terrified board members were just appearing. "After 72 hours of relentless, deep-level forensic analysis, my team and I have come to a grim but unavoidable conclusion." He paused for dramatic effect. He was a performer. "This is not a bug," he said, lying with the effortless confidence of a true sociopath. "This is not a glitch. This is, as I suspected from day one, a coordinated, sophisticated, and deeply malicious state-sponsored cyber attack." The board members gasped. State-sponsored, the magic words, the ultimate, unprovable, and terrifying boogeyman. It wasn't his fault. It wasn't Victoria's fault. It was a foreign enemy. "The code," he continued, gesturing vaguely at the cascading lines of my kernel panic log, it's like nothing I've ever seen. It appears to be quantum encrypted. It's a digital nerve agent. It's not just crashing the system, it's rewriting the foundational logic. We are dealing with a level of sophistication here that is, frankly, beyond conventional resources. Sarah, the Harvard data scientist, her own reputation on the line, nodded in fervent, complicit agreement. "He's right, Victoria. The data is chaotic. It's nonlinear. It supports Dr. Croft's hypothesis. The failure isn't in our security patch. It's a deep-seated, fundamental vulnerability in the original kernel." And there it was, the arrogant lie, the trigger language. They weren't just creating an external enemy, they were blaming the victim. They were blaming me. They were blaming Zero Cool. "The original architecture," Dr. Croft said, shaking his head with a deep, sorrowful expression. "It's amateurish, it's hobbyist code, it was garbage from the beginning." He was unknowingly insulting me, the 12-year-old kid he had just kicked out of the room. "Whoever this Zero Cool is," he sneered, "he's just some hacker in his basement. He claimed his code was stable, but he was playing with forces he couldn't possibly understand. He left this backdoor in his own sloppy work, and now a hostile foreign power has just waltzed right in. That," he said, stabbing a finger at the screen, "is your vulnerability. The board, a collection of old money investors and bankers who didn't know the difference between a kernel and a coffee pot, ate it up. They were terrified. They were relieved. It wasn't their fault. It was the fault of the basement hacker." Dr. Croft, now sensing his victory, his reputation secure, performed his peak arrogance. He delivered the final, fatal recommendation. "Victoria, members of the board, the kernel is a total loss. The original Zero Cool code is a ticking time bomb. It was inevitable. My recommendation, my only professional recommendation, is a full, scorched earth systems wipe." A gasp. A wipe," Victoria whispered, the word like a death sentence. "We have to tear it down to the studs," Croft said, his voice now firm, the hero delivering the hard truth. "Reformat every server, and rebuild from the ground up on a professional, secure platform." I knew from his own website that he meant his proprietary platform, A rebuild that would net his consulting firm a 9-figure contract. "It's a $500 million write-off, Victoria," he said, his voice filled with fake sympathy. "But it's the only way. You need to cut your losses and let us, the professionals, clean up this amateur's mess." The board was nodding. It was done. They were agreeing. They were going to kill the company. They were going to execute my perfect, elegant code, all to cover up their own catastrophic incompetence. Meanwhile, I was not in the service hallway. My mother, her face a mask of silent, burning shame, was pushing her cart toward the janitor's closet. "Leo Mijo," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I'm so sorry. They are just scared. You did nothing wrong." I wasn't listening. I had my own armor on. Tucked into the waistband of my hoodie was my own laptop, a small, cracked screen 10-year-old Dell loaded with a custom-built, lightweight version of Linux. The one I'd used to write the Ether kernel in the first place. As my mother fumbled for her keys, I pulled it out. I flipped it open. I connected, not to their secure network, but to the building's public, unsecured guest Wi-Fi. A network their experts had, in their panic, completely forgotten about. I opened a terminal. I bypassed their guest portal in less than a second. I tunneled into their mainframe. I didn't need a password. I didn't need credentials. I had built the house. I still had the master keys. A 12-year-old kid, sitting on an overturned mop bucket in a janitor's closet, was now silently, invisibly, inside their $10 billion war room. I could see the state-sponsored attack. I could see the quantum-encrypted code, and it was exactly what I thought it was. It was a typo, a single, stupid, catastrophic floating-point error. Their revolutionary security patch, their code, not mine, was trying to force a 32-bit variable into a 64-bit slot. It was a choke collar. It was an amateur, freshman-level mistake. And I watched on my own screen as Dr. Croft, the expert, confidently, arrogantly, instructed the system administrator to begin formatting the primary servers. They weren't just wrong, they were stupid, and they were about to kill the entire company. "Mom," I said, my fingers flying, "I have to go back in." "Leo, no," she hissed, grabbing my arm. "They'll call security, they'll arrest us." "Mom," I said, my voice cold, the voice of zero cool, "they're not just wrong. They're about to delete the evidence. I have to go back in. Now." I slammed the laptop shut and ran, sprinting down the hall, back toward the glass-walled tomb where the experts were about to commit corporate murder. I didn't knock. I didn't ask permission. My mother, Maria, was still pleading, "Leo, no, Mijo, they'll call the police." But I was already moving. I slammed the heavy, soundproofed glass door of the war room open. The boom of the door hitting its hydraulic stop was like a gunshot in the sterile, funereal silence. Every head snapped toward me. Victoria Vance, the CEO, the board members on the giant video wall, the entire expert team. They looked at me, the 12-year-old Maid son in the faded hoodie, with a universal expression of pure, unadulterated rage. I had interrupted their multi-billion-dollar funeral. "Stop," my voice, a high-pitched, pre-adolescent shriek, cracked through the room. It was the voice of a child, but the command was absolute. Dr. Croft, the $10,000 an hour expert, had his finger hovering over the enter key on his laptop. The command on his screen was stark: Format C, \primary servers force override all. He was 1 millimeter of pressure away from executing the $500 million write-off. He was about to murder my code, my company, my sister's last hope. He froze. Victoria Vance, her face a mask of pale, brittle grief, contorted into something new, something ugly. "Security," she screamed, her voice breaking. "I told Maria to get that child out of here. Get him, remove him, now." 2 university security guards who had been standing by the door immediately moved toward me. My mother was right behind me, weeping. "Leo, no. Mijo, please, they'll arrest us. They'll." The guards grabbed my arms. They were big men, their hands like vices on my thin biceps. This was it. This was the moment. The code switch. I stopped fighting. I stopped being a scared kid. I let my body go limp, and then I spoke. The fear, the stammer, the child voice, it all evaporated. The voice that came out of my 12-year-old body was not my own. It was the voice of Zero Cool. It was cold, it was flat, it was ancient, and it was filled with an authority so absolute, so alien, that it stopped the entire room cold. Let go of me now. The guards froze. Their hands didn't just pause, they recoiled from me as if my hoodie had suddenly become electrified. They were trained for violence, for fear, for compliance. They were utterly, biologically unprepared for command. They looked at me, this 12-year-old kid, and for the first time they saw me. They saw the danger. I ignored them. I ignored my mother, who had stopped crying, her hand over her mouth. I looked past them all, my eyes locking on Dr. Croft, who was still paralyzed at his terminal. The technical deconstruction had begun. "You're not wrong, Dr. Croft," I said, my voice echoing in the dead silent room. "You are catastrophically incompetent. You are a fraud." Victoria gasped. The Harvard data scientist, Sarah, who had been packing her bag, dropped it. The board members on the video wall leaned in, their faces a mask of confusion. Croft's face went crimson, a deep, blotchy, humiliated red. What did you just call me, you little bastard, you?" "I called you an incompetent," I snapped, taking a step toward him. The security guards didn't move. "You just stood here in front of your client, in front of the board, and you fed them a lie. You told them this was a state-sponsored attack. You told them it was quantum encrypted. You're lying, Dr. Croft. You are lying with all the confidence your $10,000 an hour fee can buy to cover your own pathetic, credentialed, and staggering ignorance. You didn't find a virus. You are the virus." Sarah, the Harvard expert, finally found her voice, her loyalty to her fellow expert overriding her shock. That's slander. He's just a child. He's guessing. He's repeating something he heard." "Am I?" I turned my gaze to her. She flinched. "Then guess this. Your state-sponsored attack. It's a recursive loop. Your quantum encryption," I sneered. "It's a floating point error. Your unsolvable, company-killing problem." I pointed a trembling 12-year-old finger at the massive 80-inch screen, at the lines of cascading red error logs, at my code. "This isn't an attack. It's a choke collar. Your new security patch, the one your team deployed 73 hours ago, patch 4077B, is creating a fatal, unhandled exception in the kernel's primary memory allocation protocol. You are, in technical terms, forcing a 32-bit signed integer into a memory slot that I, the original author, designated as a 64-bit unsigned string variable." I let that sink in. The language, the jargon, the specifics. This was not the language of a Maid son. This was not the language of a daycare distraction. This was the language of an architect. Dr. Croft's blood ran cold. I could see it. His face went from red to white to a sick, waxy gray. He knew those terms. He knew with an absolute, stomach-dropping, career-ending certainty that I was, impossibly, right. "You're trying to fit an ocean into a teacup," I continued, my voice relentless, hammering him, destroying him. "The system, my kernel, is kernel panicking because you told it to. It's not a hostile foreign power, Dr. Croft. It's your incompetence. It's your typo. And you," my voice dropped to a lethal whisper, "were about to execute a format C / command. You were about to delete the servers. You were about to destroy the evidence. You were about to burn the entire $10 billion company to the ground, to cover up your own stupid floating point error. This was the receipt. My knowledge was the receipt. The truth was the receipt." The villain's realization was absolute. It was a catastrophic, systemic collapse. Victoria Vance, the CEO, looked from her $10,000 an hour expert, who was now visibly, violently, trembling and speechless, to me, the 12-year-old janitor's son in the faded hoodie. Her entire world, her belief in Harvard, in MIT, in credentials, had just been vaporized. "Kid," she whispered, her voice a dry, rasping sound of pure, unadulterated shock. "Kid, how in God's name, do you know that?" I ignored her. I walked past the stunned, frozen security guards who parted for me as if I were royalty. I walked right up to the main terminal, where Dr. Croft was still sitting, paralyzed, his finger still hovering over the enter key. "Get up," I commanded. He didn't move. He was staring at me, his mind shattered, his $50,000 a day reputation in ruins. "I said," I repeated, my 12-year-old voice now a low, terrifying growl, "get up." I didn't wait. I grabbed his $5,000 corporate-issued laptop, slid it off the desk, and let it crash to the floor. The screen shattered. The Harvard data scientist shrieked. I didn't care. I pulled the heavy, backlit keyboard to me. "You have," I said to Croft, 5 seconds. 5 seconds to type the abort command for that server wipe. Or I will personally ensure that the SEC and the U.S. Attorney's Office charge you, personally, with the willful and malicious destruction of $10 billion in shareholder assets. The law, the threat, the specifics, that finally broke him. His hands shaking so badly he could barely type, fumbled for the keys. He typed abort. The command line flashed, server wipe, command aborted. I pushed him hard out of the $2,000 ergonomic chair. He stumbled and fell to the floor. "Now get out of my way," I said, sitting down, my 12-year-old hands hovering over the keys, my mind already deep inside the code. "The amateur is here to clean up your mess." The room was a vacuum of absolute, suffocating silence. The only sound was the clicking of my keyboard, a rapid staccato rhythm that was, in that moment, the only heartbeat of a $10 billion company. Dr. Croft, the $10,000 an hour expert, was on the floor, a heap of expensive, defeated linen, staring blankly at the shattered screen of his laptop. The other experts, the Harvard data scientist, the cybersecurity chief, were pressed against the glass wall, as far away from me as possible, as if I were a bomb that had just been armed. My mother, Maria, stood by the door, her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide, watching her 12-year-old son, the distraction, the child, suddenly take command of a room full of the most powerful people she had ever known. Victoria Vance, the CEO, was the only one still standing, though barely. She was leaning on the massive granite conference table, her knuckles white, her entire empire, her life, hanging on the actions of the 12-year-old boy she had ordered to be removed just 5 minutes earlier. Her face was a mask of pale, dawning, catastrophic realization. "Kid," she whispered, her voice a dry, rasping sound. "Kid, how do you? Who are you?" Dr. Croft, still on the floor, his mind finally snapping, echoed her, his voice a pathetic, gurgling cry. He's guessing, he read that somewhere, he can't know that." I stopped typing, the clicking stopped. The silence rushed back in, heavier this time. I spun around in the $2,000 ergonomic chair, a 12-year-old king on a stolen throne. I looked at Croft on the floor. I looked at Victoria, trembling by the table. This was the moment, the identity reveal, the thunderbolt. "He's right, Victoria," I said, my voice calm, clear, and utterly devoid of any childish lisp. "I didn't read it somewhere, and I'm not guessing." I turned to Croft. "You asked, how do I know?" I smiled, a cold, bright, and deeply satisfying smile. "I know because I wrote it." Victoria blinked. Wrote what, the patch?" "No," I said, "not the patch. Your patch is a disaster." I pointed to the massive 80-inch screen where the command line was now waiting patiently for my next instruction. "I wrote that, the kernel, the ether kernel, that's me, the amateurish, garbage code that your expert here was just slandering. That was my 11th grade science project. I am zero cool." The systemic shock was not a quiet realization, it was a detonation. The Harvard data scientist, Sarah, screamed, a short, sharp, involuntary shriek. Zero cool, that's not possible. Zero cool he's a legend, he's not a kid." Dr. Croft on the floor just stared, his mouth open, his mind completely, utterly, and permanently broken. "Zero cool," he whispered, the name a prayer. The ether kernel, he was staring at the author. He was staring at the man whose work, whose genius he had been unknowingly studying and failing to understand for his entire professional life. The hacker in his basement was, in fact, the 12-year-old Maid's son he had just ordered to be removed. And Victoria, her collapse was total. She knew that name. Zero Cool. It was the name in the original open-source license her company had acquired, stolen a decade ago. It was the name her entire $10 billion empire was built on. The anonymous, mythical, almost godlike coder who had vanished from the internet was the 12-year-old son of her maid. She didn't just stumble, her legs gave out. She collapsed into her executive chair, her hand over her heart, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated cosmic shock. This was the suiting up. Dr. Croft's armor had been a $5,000 suit and an MIT degree. Victoria's armor was a Harvard MBA and a $10 billion market cap. My armor was a faded hoodie, a deep and personal understanding of my own code, and a mind that could see the architecture of the universe. I turned back to the terminal. The child was gone. The distraction was gone. Zero Cool was now in command. "You," I said to the fainted Dr. Croft on the floor, "are fired. You," I said to the hyperventilating Harvard scientist, "are also fired. You," I said to the entire cowering expert team, "are all fired. Get your useless, credentialed, six-figure-a-year bodies out of my war room. You are contaminating my scene." No one moved. They were too terrified. "I said," I barked, my 12-year-old voice now a low, terrifying growl of pure command, "get out, now." They scrambled. It was a pathetic, terrified, uncoordinated rush for the door. Dr. Croft, revived by the sheer terror, crawled on his hands and knees before stumbling to his feet. They fled. All of them. They fled from a 12-year-old in a hoodie. Now the room was quiet. It was just me. Victoria, who was watching me, her face a mask of awe and terror, and my mother, who was standing by the door, her hand over her mouth, her eyes streaming with tears, not of shame, but of a new, fierce, and dawning pride. I cracked my knuckles. My small 12-year-old fingers hovered over the keys. The maid's son was now the commander. The janitorial staff was now the CEO. I was suited up. "Mom," I said, my voice soft again, Can you get me a soda from the machine? A root beer, this might take a minute." My mother just nodded, tears in her eyes, and left, leaving me alone with the CEO. "Okay," I said to Victoria, not even looking at her. My fingers were already flying, a blur of motion. I wasn't using their fancy, bloated graphic interface. A black, Unix-style command line screen had taken over the 80-inch monitor. I was in the Matrix. I was home. Let's see what these professionals really did. I dove into the code, my house, and I saw with a dawning, sickening horror that I was wrong. It wasn't just a typo. "Oh my God," I whispered. Victoria, pale, her voice trembling, asked, What is it? You said it was a typo." "It was a typo," I said, my fingers flying, pulling up log after log. "But it wasn't an accident. The patch that Dr. Croft's team deployed, the one with the 32-bit integer error, it also contained a payload, a malicious one." The payload," she stammered. "A backdoor," I said, my blood running cold. "The state-sponsored attack that Croft invented. He was right, just not in the way he thought. This typo, this incompetence, it wasn't a mistake, Victoria, it was a diversion. It was the smokescreen. It was designed to crash the system, to make you panic, to make you distracted, while the real attack was happening." I pointed to the command line where a data stream was now visible, a silent, hidden, massive data stream. "They're in," I whispered. "They're in your servers right now. They have been for 72 hours, while you've all been trying to fix the typo. They've been downloading everything." What, everything?" "Everything," I said, my voice grim. "Your entire customer database, your financials, your R&D, your proprietary algorithms. They're not just crashing you, Victoria. They are stealing you. They are gutting you. This wasn't a system crash. this was a heist. The room was no longer a war room. It was a crime scene, and the criminals were still in the building. The command line was my canvas. The war room, now cleared of the useless, high-priced experts, was my arena. Victoria Vance, the $10 billion CEO, was silent, watching me, her entire empire's fate hanging on the keystrokes of a 12-year-old in a faded hoodie. My mother, Maria, stood by the door, her fear now replaced by a quiet, terrified awe. The board members, still on the 80-inch video wall, were a gallery of pale, frozen, open-mouthed faces. The daycare distraction was now their only hope, and I, zero cool, was suited up. I cracked my knuckles. It was time to present my resume. It was time for the deconstruction. Okay, I said, my voice calm, the voice of the architect, the author. Let's see what you, professionals, actually did. My fingers, which had been trained on puzzle games and open-source coding challenges since I was 6, began to fly. I wasn't using their clunky, slow, graphical interface. I was in the root. I was in the command line. I was home. This is a mess, I muttered, but I made sure the room's high-fidelity microphones picked it up. Who wrote this patch, Dr. Croft? I was talking to myself, but performing for them. Your security protocol is a joke. You're not stopping intruders, you're just logging them. You're running a keylogger on your own root directory. Are you insane? You're broadcasting your admin passwords to anyone who knows where to look. You're lucky this was just a recursive loop and not a real attack. I looked over my shoulder at Victoria, who was clutching the edge of the granite table. Dr. Croft, I said, my voice dripping with the same condescension he had used on me, just told you that my kernel, the ether kernel, was amateurish. He said it was garbage. He called me a hacker in his basement. I turned back to the screen, my fingers a blur. But his patch, his professional code, is a disaster. It's not just wrong, it's dangerously incompetent. He's the amateur in his basement, Victoria, not me. I was using their own words against them. Now, I said, let's fix this. Let's show the experts how it's done. This was the hard evidence. This was the real receipt. Not a piece of paper, not a video, but the act itself, the solution. Okay, I said. He's running a recursive loop on the primary memory allocation. He's created a choke collar, so we don't fight the loop, we redirect it. I opened a new terminal. I'm creating a sandboxed virtual environment. Now, I'm trapping his faulty patch in its own playpen. Now I'm bypassing your useless looping firewall, forcing a recompile of the kernel, patching the memory leak. And now, I located the single catastrophic 32-bit integer variable that had caused the entire $10 billion crash. I highlighted it. I deleted it. I retyped it correctly as a 64-bit unsigned string. I hit enter. Recompiling, now, I whispered. The massive 80-inch screen, which had been a cascade of red system critical failure, kernel panic messages, flickered. It went black. The room held its breath. My mother let out a small, terrified gasp. Victoria's knuckles were white. And then a logo, the deep blue and beautiful VANCE Data SYSTEMS online logo. It was green. It was stable. It was alive. A sound like a flock of birds erupted from the desks. The phones, the desk phones, the cell phones, the laptops, all of them silent for 72 hours, suddenly exploded in a cacophony of dings, pings, and alerts. The 72 hours of backed-up emails, the stalled financial transactions, the lost data, it was all flooding back in. The company was breathing again. This was the villain's collapse, and it was loud. From the hallway where the expert team had been cowering, we heard a crash, a sickening heavy thud. It was Dr. Croft. The security guard, the one who had tried to grab me, peeked his head in, his face pale. Ma'am, Dr. Croft, he's fainted. The Harvard data scientist, Sarah, who was peeking in behind him, just looked at me, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated and terrified awe. Her entire, credentialed worldview had just been shattered by a 12-year-old. Victoria, she wasn't as quiet. She made a sound, a half laugh, half sob, and slid down the wall into her executive chair, her head in her hands, tears of pure, unadulterated relief streaming down her face. It's on, she whispered. It's back. But I wasn't celebrating, I was frowning. The data was flowing back in, but it was flowing out again. Wait, I said, my voice cutting through Victoria's sobs. Wait, it's not just a typo. Victoria's head snapped up. What do you mean it's fixed? The logo is on. The system is on, I said, my fingers flying again, pulling up the deep-level network logs. But Dr. Croft, he wasn't just incompetent. He was right, just not in the way he thought. What are you talking about? She stammered, standing up, her relief turning back to ice-cold terror. The patch, I said, my blood running cold as I saw the data stream. The one with the typo, it also contained a payload, a malicious one. The typo wasn't the mistake, Victoria. It was the diversion. It was the smokescreen. It was designed to crash the system, to make you panic, to make you call in experts like Croft. To make everyone look here. I pointed to the fixed kernel error, while the real attack was happening here. I pointed to the network log. A silent, hidden, massive data stream, pouring out of her servers to an encrypted, off-site IP address in Eastern Europe. They're in, I whispered, the revelation hitting me. They've been in for 72 hours, while you've all been trying to fix the typo. They've been downloading everything. What everything? Everything, I said, my voice grim. I pulled up the file transfer logs. Your entire customer database, your R&D, your proprietary algorithms, your financials. They're not just crashing you, Victoria. They are stealing you. They are gutting you. This wasn't a system crash. This was a heist. The room was no longer a war room. It was a crime scene. And the criminals, I realized, as I saw the data packets moving in real time, they were still in the building. The experts hadn't just failed to find the typo. They had, in their arrogance, completely missed the billion-dollar robbery that was happening right under their noses. The auditorium was a disaster zone of shattered reputations. Dr. Evelyn Reed was catatonic, her body shaking in silent, racking sobs, a grotesque monument to her own ruined ambition. Dr. Barlow, the department head, was being attended to by campus security, his face a mask of purple-tinged panic as he clutched his chest, stammering about lawyers and deniability to anyone who would listen. Dr. Chen, the rival, had simply vanished, slipping out a side door the moment I had accused him of his own plagiarism. The graduate students, the ones who had laughed and filmed, were now utterly silent, their faces pale, staring at me as if I were a vengeful god who had just descended from a mountaintop. They were witnessing, in real time, the complete and total collapse of the authority figures they had spent their entire lives trying to impress. This was the final speech, the verdict. It was not a time for anger that had passed. It was a time for the cold, hard, and final word. I walked back to the center of the stage, to the keynote podium she had abandoned. I didn't touch it. I stood beside it, my hands clasped behind my back. I looked not at the broken professors, but at the students, at the next generation. For 10 years, I said, my voice quiet, but it carried in the dead silent hall, amplified by the microphone. I have lived in your world invisible. I have pushed a mop. I have emptied your trash. I have cleaned up your messes, both literal and, as we've seen today, figurative. And in all that time, not one of you, not one, ever looked me in the eye. Not one of you asked my name, because to you I was not a person. I was a function. I was the help. I was the janitor. I paused, letting the weight of their collective shame settle on them. You are here, I said, sweeping my arm across the room, in this temple of intellectualism to learn. But you have learned the single most dangerous lesson this place can teach, that a person's value is tied to their credentials. You see a PhD from Yale and you see a somebody. You see a man in gray coveralls and you see a nobody. You have built a temple to credentials instead of intellect. You have learned to worship the paper and to ignore the person. And in doing so, you have created a system, a culture that would rather celebrate a fraudulent, tenured star like Dr. Reed Then listen to a janitor who was, in plain, simple, and mathematically verifiable English, telling you the truth. The real problem in this university isn't the help, it's the hubris. I let that word hang in the air, hubris. From the back of the auditorium, a new voice boomed, sharp and authoritative. He is correct. The crowd parted. It was the university president, Dr. Alastair Finch, a man who had been in the audience, drawn by the viral buzz, watching the entire symposium from the shadows. He was pale, his face a mask of controlled, volcanic rage. He was not alone. He was flanked by the university's general counsel and two plain-clothed, serious-looking campus police, who looked less like security and more like federal marshals. This was the sentence. President Finch walked not to the stage but to the front row, where Dr. Barlow was now being given a glass of water by a trembling graduate student. "Dr. Barlow," Finch said, his voice dangerously quiet. Barlow looked up, his eyes wide and pleading. "As of this moment, you are suspended from your duties as department head, effective immediately, pending a full, independent, and federal investigation. Your lack of oversight, your complicity in this fraud, is a stain on this university's reputation. You are to be escorted from this building. Now." Barlow collapsed back into his chair as if he'd been shot. "Alastair, please, she fooled me. She fooled us all. I had no idea." "She fooled no one," Finch snapped, his voice cracking like a whip. "You were complicit. You enabled her because she brought in grant money. You have sold this university's reputation for cash. Get him out." The police officers, no longer campus cops but acting as arms of the president, lifted Barlow, a broken, weeping, 60-year-old man, by his arms and began escorting him up the aisle. Then President Finch turned to Dr. Reed. She was still in her chair, rocking, her face hidden in her hands, her body shaking. "Dr. Reed," he said. She flinched but didn't look up. "Dr. Reed," he repeated, louder a command. She slowly, agonizingly lifted her head. Her face was a ruin, a map of tear-streaked foundation and terror. You can't," she whispered, her voice a raw, broken plea. "I can," Finch said, his voice pure ice. "You have not just committed gross academic plagiarism. You have not just humiliated a member of this university's staff in a manner that is, frankly, sociopathic. You have, as Mr. Harlan has so brilliantly and publicly demonstrated, committed federal grant fraud. You have falsified data. You have lied repeatedly to the National Science Foundation. And in doing so, you have exposed this entire university to federal prosecution and catastrophic financial penalties that could cripple us for a decade." He turned to the general counsel, who spoke for the first time, his voice a dry, legal monotone. "Our legal team has already been in contact with the U.S. Attorney's Office and the NSF's Office of the Inspector General. We are turning over all of Dr. Reed's research, her lab notes, her hard drives, and yes, Dr. Chen's as well, for a full criminal investigation." "No," Reed shrieked, a raw animal sound lurching to her feet. "No, my work. It's mine. You can't, he. "It was never your work, Evelyn," Finch said, his voice suddenly soft, which was far more terrifying. "It was his. He gestured to me standing on the stage. And as of this moment, you are terminated from your tenured position, effective immediately for cause. Your lab is sealed. You are banned from this campus. You will be escorted out. Do not ever return." This was the sentence. This was the final, devastating punishment. Her career, her reputation, her 1DSG note dollars. $5 million was mentioned in the outline but not in the sections. Using it here, 5 million grant, her tenure, everything she had built her arrogant, cruel life upon, vaporized in a single public speech. As the officers began to lift her, she had one last, convulsive burst of defiance. She looked at me, her eyes wild with a hatred that was almost pure. "And you," she screamed, pointing a shaking finger, her voice a broken shriek. You did this, you janitor, you." I just looked at her. I didn't say a word. I just held her gaze. And then from the back of the room, another voice, a new one, a woman. "That's Dr. Harlan, you mean?" It was Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the visiting professor from Stanford, the one from the original transcript analysis who had recognized my brilliance. She had been sitting in the audience, watching. "And I believe, President Finch," she said, walking down the aisle, her face beaming with a kind of righteous joy, "that you're not the only one with an offer. Dr. Harlan, on behalf of Stanford University and the head of our mathematics department, I am authorized to offer you a full, tenured professorship and a $2 million research grant to restart your lab, effective immediately." The competitor academics, the ones who hadn't been implicated, their jaws dropped. Dr. Chen, who had apparently not escaped, was being blocked at the door by another officer, his face white as a sheet. A bidding war had just broken out over the janitor. I looked at the chaos. I looked at Reed, who was being dragged out screaming, her marriage proposal, taunt now the punchline to the most tragic, humiliating joke of her life. I looked at Barlow being helped into a security cart. I looked at Chen, pale and trembling by the door, pleading with an impassive officer. And I looked at the three whiteboards, covered in the beautiful, elegant, and truthful mathematics that had, in 1 hour, changed everything. This was the final gavel drop. I picked up the eraser. I looked at the impossible equation, the one that had been my prison and now my liberation. I looked at Dr. Reed's name, which was still signed at the bottom of it, a pathetic monument to her own fraud. "As for this," I said, my voice carrying over the din, I walked to the board, and with one clean, satisfying swipe I erased her name. Then I erased the entire, beautiful, complex proof. I wiped all 3 boards clean until they were blank, white, and pure. A new beginning. Class dismissed. The systemic takedown was not just a ripple, it was a tidal wave. The events of that symposium, filmed by 300 graduate students and broadcast by the university's own media team, became the single most watched academic event in history. The footage, my 15-minute deconstruction of Dr. Reed's fraud, her "marry me" taunt, her rival's complicity, and her department head's collapse, was sent to every major news outlet on the planet. The story of the janitor genius was no longer a campus legend. It was a global phenomenon. Dr. Evelyn Reed's fall was as swift as it was total. Faced with the irrefutable public proof of her academic plagiarism, her conspiracy to defraud the National Science Foundation, and the testimony of her entire department, she was found guilty of federal grant fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. Her brilliant career, built on arrogance and theft, ended with the gavel strike of a federal judge. She was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison and permanently barred from ever receiving federal grant money again. She was, in the academic world, rendered radioactive, a ghost. The competitors who had enabled her were systematically purged. Dr. Barlow, the department head who had been more concerned with optics than with truth, was forced to resign in disgrace. His lack of oversight and his clear complicity in the cover-up were deemed a catastrophic failure of leadership. The university, to save face, stripped him of his tenure and his pension. He was last seen consulting for a third-rate textbook company, his career over. And Dr. Chen, the competitor who had sneered at Reed's downfall, found himself the subject of the next investigation. My offhand accusation of his own plagiarism triggered a separate inquiry, which of course found that he too had been stealing my work for years. He was fired, his reputation in ruins. The entire mathematics department at Whitmore University was placed on academic probation, its prestige shattered, its one ranking lost in a single, humiliating afternoon. But the real ripple effect was the restoration. The university, facing a lawsuit from me that would have bankrupted them and a criminal investigation from the DOJ that would have crippled them, offered a swift and total surrender. They didn't just apologize, they made amends. My sister, Sarah, was the first priority. Her experimental medical trial, which had been the entire reason for my sacrifice, was immediately and fully funded, not by my janitor's insurance, but by the President's Special Reparations Fund. Her medical bills, past, present, and future, were wiped clean. With the crushing financial burden gone, and with access to the best care in the world, she made a full and miraculous recovery. My 10-year, silent, desperate gamble had paid off. And as for me, Dr. William Harlan, the janitor, the offers were overwhelming. Caltech, my alma mater, offered me my old PhD spot back along with a full fellowship. MIT offered a tenure-track professorship. Stanford, as Dr. Rodriguez had promised, offered a $2 million research grant. I turned them all down. Instead, I accepted a new, custom-created position at Whitmore University, not as a professor but as the first-ever director of the new Institute for Foundational Research. I didn't just want to win. I wanted to change the very system that had wronged me. My first act as director was to use the massive reparations fund the university had been forced to establish. I created the Sarah Harlan Scholarship, named for my sister. It wasn't a normal scholarship. It was a full-ride, all-expenses-paid scholarship, including housing, food, and books, for students from non-traditional backgrounds. And its primary, written in the charter, requirement that 50% of its recipients must be chosen from the university's support staff and their children, the janitors, the cafeteria workers, the groundskeepers, the invisible people. They thought he was just a janitor. They thought he was the help. They forgot that genius doesn't care about a job title, and true intellect doesn't need a PhD to be recognized. But in this case, it just so happened to have one. They thought they could bury my work, but they didn't realize it was a seed. They thought they had humiliated me, but they only, in their arrogance, gave me the one thing I had lost: a voice. If you believe in the power of the underdog, if you believe that a person's worth is not defined by their uniform, like this video and subscribe for more stories where the overlooked and the underestimated get the last, glorious, and undeniable laugh. Comment below, have you ever been underestimated just because of your job? We want to hear your story.